Good evening, students. Today we're going to talk about domain and range from a mapping, table, points, and graph. So make sure you get out your foldable so you can fill it out as we go along with this video. Right now, turn to domain and range from a table, points, and mapping in your foldable. You will fill this section out first. So go to domain and range from a table, points, and mapping section in your foldable. Okay, somewhere in your foldable, put that domain is the X and range is the Y value. Now, let's look at this. We're going to look at domain and range from a table first. So go to where your table is, and let's look at this first. So first I want to do the domain. Remember, the domain is my X values. So all of the X values are going to go in my domain. So we'll have X, colon, and then the brackets, and then we list in order from least to greatest. So it's -3, 0, 1, 4, and 5. Close your bracket. Then if we want to do the range, remember the range is your Y values. So you're going to list in order from least to greatest. Now, my least number is -6, so that comes first. And then 1. You notice how 1 repeats itself? We only write it one time. Even if it occurs twice, you only write it one time. And then we have 5 and then 8. So again, remember, always list from least to greatest. Now, let's go look at domain and range from points. So let's say you're given a list of points. Well, again, domain is going to be your X values. So my X values here are the first values. So this is my X, 2, and then -1, then 4, and then 1 again. So those are my X values. My second number that comes, let me change my highlighter color real quick. The second number that comes are my Y values. So my Y would be 3, 9, -2, 9, and 5. So my domain is going to be my X, so it's going to be colon, and then again, you're going to go from least to greatest. So it's -1, and it occurs twice, but again, we only write it one time. And then we have 1, 2, and then 4. And the same with our range. We're going to go from least to greatest with our range. So we have -2, 3, 5, and then 9. Again, it occurs twice, but we only write it one time. Now let's look at domain and range. Oh, also, always remember to list from least to greatest. Now let's look at domain and range from a mapping. So if we have this mapping, again, domain is going to be my X values, and range is going to be my Y values. So domain is my X. So my X values in this case are -3, -2, 2, and then 9. Again, we have to go from least to greatest. Then our range is our Y values. So in this case, it's going to be -1, 0, and then 5. So that is how you do domain and range from a from a mapping. You just list out your X values and then list out your Y values. And again, always remember to list from least to greatest. Now I'll turn over to domain and range from a graph in your foldable, and we will fill this section out. Make sure you are on the right graph when copying to your foldable. Okay, make sure you have the right graph that you're copying underneath on your foldable. Okay, so again, remember we have domain and range. So remember, domain goes from the furthest to the left to the furthest to the right. So in this case, my domain is -6 to 2. So, and remember, if it is an open circle, there's no line. If it is a closed circle, there's a line underneath. So with the -6, it's an open circle, so there's no line. And with the 2, it's a closed circle, so there's this line underneath here. And now let's look at range. So with range, you're going to go to the bottom point or lowest point to the highest point for range. So my range goes from -4 to +7. So at -4, since it's a closed circle, we have a line. And at 7, since it's an open circle, we have no line. Now let's look at the next graph. We have this graph. Again, for domain, we're going to go to the most left and then to the most right. So in this case, it's -9 to 8. At -9, it's a closed circle, so there should have been a line underneath. And at 8, it's an open circle, so there shouldn't have been this line underneath here. So that line should not be there. There should have been a line under the -9 though. Now let's look at range. Okay, we're going to go to the bottom point up to the highest point. Okay, so it goes from -6. -6 is included because it's not an open circle, so that's why there's a line. And 7 is not included. It's an open circle, so that's why there's no line there. Let's look at the next graph. This graph, if you look, there's no most left point and there's no most right point. So that means my domain is all real numbers. Remember, this means all real numbers. Sorry for my handwriting on here. All real numbers. Okay? Now, my range, you're going to go to the furthest, or go to the lowest point. So here's my lowest point, all the way up to the highest point. Well, there isn't a high point, so we don't have that. So y has to be greater than negative or equal to -5 because it is included. Okay, because there's not an open circle. Let's look at our next graph. This one's a little bit different because we just have ordered pairs. Okay, so we're just going to list them out. So for x, we have -8, we have -4, we have 2, and we have 4. So that would be my domain. -8, -4, 2, and 4. Remember, least to greatest. For range, we have -5, 1, and then 3. So my domain is -5, 1, and 3. So remember, if it's just a scatter plot or just a bunch of points, you're going to list them out. Let's look at this graph. For domain, we're going to go to the far left. And since there isn't a far right, it's just going to be x is greater than or equal to -7 because it stops at -7. It's a closed circle, so there's a line underneath. And for range, it goes to -4. So my range, and then there's no high point because it's never going to stop, is y is greater than or equal to -4. And our last one, On the domain, there's not a left and there's not a right. So my answer is all real numbers. And on the range, there's not a bottom and there's not a top. So again, my answer is all real numbers. Okay, remember that's what this sign represents, the all real numbers. Okay. Also, write this in your foldable somewhere. Closed circle means there's a line underneath. This line right here, if it's a closed circle. If it's an open circle, no line. We're not going to have that line underneath it. Okay, so write that somewhere down in your foldable. Have this ready for tomorrow. We're going to go through an activity, and I'll see you then. Have a great night.